September 23, 1943. 11:21 in the morning. Somewhere over western Germany. The sky was already burning. Inside the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes gripped the side of the fuselage as the aircraft shuddered violently. The right engine had been hit. Flames were now trailing behind them like a signal flare for every German fighter in the sky. And the worst part? They were still deep inside enemy territory. The intercom crackled. "Fire in engine 3. Losing pressure." The pilot, First Lieutenant Robert Gaines, did not respond immediately. He was staring straight ahead, calculating something. Altitude. Distance. Survival. Below them, Germany stretched for miles. No friendly ground. No safe landing. Only capture. Or worse. At 11:22 in the morning, another explosion tore through the aircraft. Flak. Black bursts surrounded them like a tightening noose. The anti-aircraft guns had found their range. Daniel felt the plane dip sharply. For a moment, everything slowed. He looked across the narrow interior. The waist gunner was gone. His position was empty. No warning. No scream. Just gone. And now the bomber was losing altitude. Fast. But something far worse was about to happen. At 11:23 in the morning, 3 German Messerschmitt 109 fighters appeared through the smoke. Closing in. Fast. Daniel's heartbeat surged. This was the kill phase. The moment when damaged bombers were finished off. The dorsal gunner opened fire. Tracers cut through the air. One of the fighters pulled away. The other 2 did not. They came straight in. One from above. One from the side. The cockpit glass shattered. The aircraft lurched violently. Inside, alarms screamed. Hydraulics were failing. Controls were stiffening. And then the order came. Prepare to bail out. Daniel froze. For a split second, his mind refused to process it. Bail out. Over Germany. At 11:24 in the morning. That meant one thing. If he survived the jump, he would land in the heart of Nazi-controlled territory. Alone. Unarmed. Hunted. And he had no idea what waited for him on the ground. But there was no time to think. The aircraft tilted again. Harder this time. Fire was spreading. Fuel was leaking. Another few seconds, and the entire bomber would explode. "What would you have done here?" Daniel grabbed his parachute. His hands were shaking. Not from fear. From the realization that everything had just changed. The mission was over. Now it was survival. At 11:25 in the morning, he moved toward the open hatch. Wind roared inside the aircraft like a hurricane. Below him, the ground looked impossibly far. Fields. Roads. Small villages. All enemy. Behind him, someone hesitated. Another crew member. He could not jump. Not yet. Daniel did not wait. He stepped forward. And fell. The cold air hit him like a wall. For a few seconds there was no sound. No aircraft. No gunfire. Just silence. And the terrifying rush of open sky. He counted. 1, 2, 3. At 4, he pulled the cord. The parachute snapped open. Violently. His body jerked upward. Pain shot through his shoulders. But he was alive. For now. As he drifted downward, he looked up. The B-17 was still in the sky. Burning. Falling. And then, at 11:26 in the morning, it exploded. A fireball against the clouds. Gone. Just like that. Daniel was now completely alone. But the real danger had only just begun. Below him, movement. People were gathering. Civilians. Farmers. And possibly something else. He saw a truck on a nearby road. Dark green. Moving fast. Too fast. German military. They had seen the parachutes. They were coming. At this moment, Daniel had no weapon. No map. No plan. Only one chance: to disappear before they reached him. But there was something he did not know yet. Something that would decide whether he lived or died in the next few hours. Because not everyone on the ground wanted to capture him. And not everyone wanted to save him. As he descended toward an open field, the question was no longer if he would land safely. The question was this: who would reach him first? The German soldiers? Or someone else entirely? And the answer to that question would change everything. 11:28 in the morning. Rural farmland near Münster, Germany. Daniel hit the ground harder than he expected. The impact knocked the air out of his lungs. For a few seconds he could not breathe. He rolled onto his side, gasping, trying to force oxygen back into his chest. Then he heard it. Voices. Shouting. German. Close. Too close. At 11:29 in the morning, Daniel cut himself free from the parachute harness. The white canopy collapsed beside him, bright and visible against the dark soil. A mistake. He grabbed the fabric and dragged it toward a nearby hedgerow. His hands moved fast now. No hesitation. No fear. Just instinct. Because he knew something critical. A parachute was not just equipment. It was a signal. And that signal was already being followed. He glanced toward the road. The truck was closer now. Less than a mile away. He could hear the engine. And then something unexpected happened. A voice behind him. Quiet. Urgent. Quick. This way. Daniel spun around. A man stood at the edge of the hedgerow. Civilian clothes. Mid-40s. No uniform. No visible weapon. But his eyes were locked on Daniel. Focused. Not afraid. Not surprised. Which made this moment even more dangerous. Because Daniel had no way of knowing who he was. A farmer. A sympathizer. Or someone about to hand him over. What would you have done here? Trust him. Or run. The man gestured again. Faster this time. No time. At 11:30 in the morning, Daniel made a decision. He followed. They moved through the hedgerow, pushing into a narrow dirt path hidden between thick brush. Within seconds, the open field disappeared behind them. Gone. Like he had never landed there at all. But something far worse was about to unfold. At 11:32 in the morning, the German truck reached the field. Soldiers jumped out. Rifles ready. They spread out quickly, scanning the area. One of them pointed at the parachute. Shouting. Another ran toward the hedgerow. They were already tracking him. And they were getting closer. Inside the narrow path, Daniel struggled to keep up. His flight suit was heavy. His boots slipped on loose dirt. Every step felt louder than it should. The man in front of him did not slow down. Where are we going? Daniel whispered. No answer. Only movement. Faster now. At 11:34 in the morning, they reached a small farmhouse. Old. Worn. But hidden. The man pushed open the door and pulled Daniel inside. Upstairs. Still no explanation. Daniel climbed. Every second felt like a countdown. Behind them, the sound of engines grew louder. The search was expanding. At 11:35 in the morning, Daniel was shoved into a small attic space. Low ceiling. Bare wood. A single narrow window. The man handed him something. Clothes. Civilian. Change. Now. Daniel hesitated for half a second. Then obeyed. Because the reality was clear. His uniform was a death sentence. At 11:37 in the morning, boots hit the ground outside. Heavy. Organized. German soldiers. Voices shouted below. The farmhouse door opened. Daniel froze. Above him, the attic creaked. Dust fell from the beams. Every breath felt too loud. Every movement felt like it would give him away. Below, a soldier spoke sharply. Questions. The farmer responded. Calm. Measured. Too calm. Was he protecting Daniel? Or stalling? At 11:38 in the morning, footsteps moved inside the house. Closer. Then closer again. Daniel's hand tightened into a fist. No weapon. No escape route. If they came upstairs, it was over. But something strange happened. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a different voice. Lower. More authoritative. A decision was being made. And Daniel had no idea what it was. Seconds passed. Then more. And then, slowly, the footsteps moved away. The door below opened again. Closed. The engine outside started. And just like that, they were gone. Daniel did not move. Not yet. Because he understood something critical. This was not safety. This was delay. At 11:42 in the morning, the man returned to the attic. For the first time, he spoke clearly. They will come back. Next time, they will search everything. Daniel stared at him. Why are you helping me? The man paused. Just for a moment. Then he said something that changed everything. Because you are not the first. Open loop. Not the first what? Shot down airman? Or part of something bigger? The man continued. There is a way out. But it is not safe. And it is not fast. Daniel felt the weight of those words immediately. A way out. Out of Germany. Out of occupied territory. But at what cost? At 11:45 in the morning, the man leaned closer. You will have to walk. Daniel blinked. Walk where? The answer came slowly. Through Germany. Into Belgium. Then France. Then Spain. Hundreds of miles. Enemy territory. Checkpoints. Patrols. Informants. And no margin for error. But something far worse was hidden inside that plan. Because escape was not just about distance. It was about people. And people could betray you. At this moment, Daniel realized the truth. Surviving the jump had been the easy part. Now, every step could be his last. And the man had not told him everything yet. Because there was one detail missing. One critical piece of information that would decide whether this journey even had a chance. Who exactly was organizing this escape? And how many had already failed trying? 2:15 in the afternoon. Inside a farmhouse attic near Münster, Germany. Daniel had been in hiding for almost 3 hours. 3 hours of silence. 3 hours of listening. Every distant engine. Every barking dog. Every footstep outside felt like the moment everything would end. Below him, the man moved carefully through the house. No sudden noise. No unnecessary movement. Disciplined. Controlled. Which meant this was not random. This was planned. At 2:16 in the afternoon, the man climbed back into the attic. This time, he brought more than clothes. He carried a small bundle. Food. Bread. Cheese. And something else. Papers. Folded carefully. Protected. Important. Daniel sat up slowly. Who are you? He asked. The man looked at him for a long moment. Then finally answered. My name is Karl Fischer. The name meant nothing to Daniel. But what came next did. I am part of a network. There it was. The first piece of the hidden system. But Karl did not explain immediately. He handed Daniel the papers instead. Look. Daniel unfolded them. They were identification documents. Civilian. German. A name he did not recognize. A birthplace he had never seen. A life that was not his. This is you now, Karl said. Daniel stared at the paper. The photograph was not his. But from a distance it might pass. Maybe. If no one looked too closely. If no one asked too many questions. If they do? Daniel asked quietly. Karl did not hesitate. Then you are finished. No comfort. No illusion. Just truth. But something far worse was hidden beneath that answer. At 2:18 in the afternoon, Karl pointed to the map. A crude sketch. Hand-drawn. Routes. Villages. Rail lines. Checkpoints marked with small crosses. You cannot take roads, Carl said. Too many patrols. He traced a line through fields and forests. You move at night. Another line. You rest during the day. Daniel followed each mark carefully. The path twisted constantly. Avoiding towns. Avoiding main routes. Avoiding attention. This was not just travel. This was evasion. And one mistake would expose everything. But there was still something missing. Something Carl had not explained yet. Who else is in this network? Daniel asked. Carl paused again. Longer this time. Then he said it. There are many. Farmers. Workers. Women. Priests. A resistance network. Hidden in plain sight. Operating inside Germany itself. Which raised a far more dangerous question. How many know about me? Carl's answer came quietly. Enough. Open loop. Enough to help him. Or enough to betray him. At 2:20 in the afternoon, a sudden sound cut through the air. A vehicle. Closer than before. Both men froze. Carl moved instantly to the window. Just a glance. Then he stepped back. Police, he whispered. Not army. Not frontline soldiers. This was worse. Local police knew the area. Knew the people. Knew who did not belong. And they had time. Time to search properly. Time to question. Time to notice things others might miss. At 2:21 in the afternoon, boots hit the ground outside again. More organized this time. More deliberate. They were not rushing. They were hunting. Daniel felt his pulse spike. This is it, he thought. But Carl did something unexpected. He reached for a loose board in the attic floor. Pulled it aside. Revealing a narrow space beneath. Hidden. Carefully constructed. Inside, Carl said. Daniel did not argue. He slid into the space. It was barely wide enough to breathe. Carl replaced the board. Darkness. Total. At 2:22 in the afternoon, the door below opened. Voices. Calm at first. Then sharper. Questions. Carl answered again. But this time, there was tension in his voice. Small. Almost invisible. But real. The kind that trained interrogators could hear. Footsteps moved across the floor. Then paused. Right below the attic. Daniel held his breath. Seconds stretched. Then something changed. A new voice. Different tone. More suspicious. A decision point. And Daniel could not see any of it. He could only listen. At 2:24 in the afternoon, the footsteps moved toward the stairs. Upstairs. Toward him. Every second now felt louder. Closer. The wood creaked. A step. Then another. They were coming. And this time, they were not leaving quickly. Daniel realized something in that moment. If they opened the attic, if they found the hidden space, there would be no second chance. No escape route. No network. Nothing. But something far worse was about to be revealed. Because the real danger was not just the men climbing those stairs. It was what they already suspected. And why they had come back so quickly. At 2:25 in the afternoon, the footsteps stopped at the top. Silence. Then a hand touched the attic door. And began to push it open. 2:25 in the afternoon. Farmhouse attic near Münster, Germany. The attic door creaked open. Light spilled across the wooden floor. Dust particles drifted in the air. And then, silence. Daniel could hear breathing above him. Slow. Controlled. A man stepping into the attic. At 2:26 in the afternoon, the first boot touched the floorboards. Heavy. Measured. Not rushed. This was not a random search. This was careful. Deliberate. Dangerous. Below the floor, Daniel lay completely still. Every muscle locked. Every breath held. Because now, survival depended on one thing. Not being heard. Above him, The officer moved slowly across the attic. One step. Pause. Another step. Pause. Listening. Testing. Daniel felt the wood shift slightly under the weight. The hidden board above his face creaked. Just enough to matter. At this moment, one wrong sound would end everything. But something far worse was happening. Because this officer was not guessing. He was checking specific places. At 2:27 in the afternoon, the officer stopped. Right above Daniel. No movement. No sound. Just presence. Then, a knock. 2 sharp taps on the floor. Testing for hollow space. Daniel's heart slammed against his chest. Too loud. Too fast. He tried to control it. But fear does not follow orders. Another tap. Closer this time. Right above his head. The wood vibrated slightly. Daniel closed his eyes. This was it. But then something unexpected happened. A voice from below. Calling out. Urgent. German. The officer hesitated. Just for a second. Then stepped back. The pressure lifted. The footsteps moved away. Toward the attic door. At 2:28 in the afternoon, the officer stopped again. Halfway out. One last look. One last pause. Daniel did not move. Could not move. And then, the door closed. The footsteps descended. Gone. But this was not over. Because something had changed. At 2:30 in the afternoon, voices downstairs became louder. More intense. Questions were sharper now. Faster. The tone had shifted. Suspicion had turned into certainty. They knew something was wrong. They just had not found it yet. Below, Carl responded again. But this time, there was pressure in every word. Daniel could hear it clearly now. The calm was breaking. At 2:32 in the afternoon, a loud crash echoed through the house. Furniture being moved. Drawers opened. Objects thrown aside. They were escalating. Turning the house inside out. And that meant one thing. Time was running out. Inside the hidden space, the air felt thinner. Hotter. Harder to breathe. Daniel's chest tightened. Not from panic. From reality. If they continued this search, they would find the compartment. Eventually. And there would be no way out. But something far worse was unfolding beyond the attic. Because the problem was no longer just this house. It was the network. If Carl was exposed, everything connected to him would collapse. Every route. Every contact. Every safe place. Gone. At 2:35 in the afternoon, the voices below suddenly stopped. Silence. Total. Then a new sound. Paper. Rustling. Documents being examined. Daniel's stomach dropped. The identification papers. The map. If they found those, it would confirm everything. At 2:36 in the afternoon, a voice spoke again. Lower now. Controlled. But dangerous. A decision was being made. And Daniel could not hear the words. Only the tone. And the tone said everything. At 2:37 in the afternoon, footsteps moved again. Toward the door. Then outside. Engines started. Doors slammed. And just like that, they left. Again. But this time, something felt different. Worse. Because they had not failed. They had learned. At 2:40 in the afternoon, Carl returned to the attic. He did not speak immediately. He just looked at Daniel. And for the first time, there was something new in his expression. Urgency. Real urgency. They know, Carl said quietly. Daniel felt it instantly. Not suspicion. Not doubt. Knowledge. They will come back tonight, Carl continued. With more men. Which meant the situation had just escalated beyond control. There would be no hiding. No waiting. No second chance inside this house. At this moment, the only option left was the most dangerous one. Move. Now. But there was a problem. A major one. Daniel was not ready. He did not know the routes. He did not know the signals. He did not know who to trust next. And yet he had no choice. At 2:42 in the afternoon, Carl handed him a small object. A compass. Worn. Used. Essential. You leave before dark, Carl said. Alone. Daniel stared at him. Alone? Carl nodded. If we move together, we both die. The truth hit hard. This was not a guided escape. This was survival. Step by step. Decision by decision. Mistake by mistake. At 2:43 in the afternoon, Carl leaned closer. There is a woman in the next village. She will help you. Another unknown. Another risk. Another open loop. Who was she? Could she be trusted? Or was this the moment everything would fall apart? Because in occupied territory, trust could be fatal. And betrayal could come from anywhere. At this moment, Daniel understood something critical. The network was not a straight path. It was a chain. And if one link broke, everything behind it collapsed. At 2:45 in the afternoon, Carl opened the attic window slightly. Fresh air entered. Cold. Sharp. Real. Remember, Carl said. Do not run unless you must. Daniel nodded slowly. Because he finally understood the rules. Stay invisible. Stay quiet. Stay alive. But something far worse was waiting for him outside. Because the next phase of his escape would not be inside walls. It would be in the open. Where anyone could see him. Anyone could stop him. And anyone could decide his fate in a single moment. As the sun slowly began to drop, Daniel prepared to leave the only safe place he had left. And step directly into the most dangerous part of his journey. Because once he walked out that door, there would be no turning back. 7:10 in the evening. Edge of a rural village, western Germany. The light was fading. Fast. Daniel stood at the edge of the hedgerow, watching the last traces of sunlight disappear behind the fields. The world was turning gray. Shapes were becoming shadows. This was the moment. Move now. Or never. At 7:11 in the evening he stepped out. No uniform. No insignia. Only borrowed clothes and a name that was not his. Every step felt exposed. Every sound felt amplified. The dirt road stretched ahead, cutting through the village like a narrow line of risk. And somewhere inside that village was the woman Carl had mentioned. But something was already wrong. Too quiet. No voices. No movement. Even for evening, this silence felt unnatural. At 7:13 in the evening, Daniel slowed his pace. Scanning. Listening. A window opened somewhere in the distance. Then shut quickly. Someone had seen him. The question was simple. Were they afraid of him? Or reporting him? But something far worse was waiting just ahead. At 7:14 in the evening he saw it. A checkpoint. 2 German soldiers. Rifles slung. Standing beside a small wooden barrier. Controlling the only road through the village. Daniel stopped instantly. Heart racing. Carl had not mentioned this. Which meant one thing. It was new. Set up after the earlier search. The net was tightening. At this moment, Daniel had 3 choices. Turn back. Hide. Or walk straight through. What would you have done here? Turning back risked patrols behind him. Hiding risked discovery. But walking through, that required perfection. At 7:15 in the evening, Daniel made his decision. He started walking. Normal pace. Not too fast. Not too slow. Every step measured. Every movement controlled. The soldiers noticed him immediately. One turned. Watching. Then the other. Now both eyes were on him. At 7:16 in the evening, one of them stepped forward. Papers. The word hit like a gunshot. Daniel reached into his pocket. Slowly. Carefully. No sudden movements. He handed over the documents. The soldier took them. Looked down. Then back up. Comparing. Daniel forced himself to breathe normally. Not too deep. Not too shallow. At this distance, any sign of fear could be enough. Seconds passed. Too many. The second soldier moved closer. Now there were two of them. Both watching. Both waiting. And something was wrong. The first soldier frowned slightly. A small detail. But enough. He flipped the paper again. Looking closer. At 7:17 in the evening, he asked a question. Sharp. Direct. In German. Daniel understood only part of it. Birthplace. Details. Verification. This was the moment everything could collapse. But something unexpected happened. Daniel answered. Not perfectly. But enough. Short. Simple. Controlled. The soldier stared at him. Longer this time. Then, handed the papers back. Go. Just like that. Daniel nodded once. Turned. And walked. Not fast. Never fast. Because running now would destroy everything. At 7:18 in the evening, he passed the checkpoint. Alive. Unstopped. But not safe. Because something had just happened that he did not fully understand. The soldier had hesitated. Not because the papers were perfect. But because something else distracted him. Something behind Daniel. Something that had pulled his attention away at the exact right moment. And Daniel had no idea what it was. Open loop. As he moved deeper into the village, the silence returned. But now it felt heavier. More dangerous. At 7:20 in the evening, he reached a small house at the far end. The one Carl had described. White walls. Dark roof. Single door. No light visible. Daniel approached slowly. Knocked once. Then twice. Nothing. Seconds passed. Then the door opened slightly. A woman stood inside. Older. Calm. Eyes sharp. She looked at him once. Then stepped aside. No words. Just a silent invitation. Daniel entered. The door closed behind him. Locked. At 7:22 in the evening, the woman finally spoke. You were followed. Daniel felt the words hit instantly. What? She shook her head. Not closely. But enough. The checkpoint. The hesitation. It was not random. They were watching. Tracking movement. Waiting for mistakes. Which meant his margin for error had just dropped to zero. At 7:24 in the evening, she placed a small bag on the table. Food. Water. And something else. A different set of papers. Stronger. More convincing. You leave in 10 minutes, she said. Daniel stared at her. Where do I go next? She pointed west. Forest line. Then rail crossing. Someone will meet you. Another unknown. Another risk. Another step deeper into danger. But something far worse was hidden inside her next words. Not everyone who says they are helping you is helping you. Daniel froze. Because now the rules had changed again. It was not just about avoiding the enemy. It was about identifying the truth. And the truth was becoming harder to see. At 7:26 in the evening, Daniel picked up the bag. His hands were steady now. Not because he was calm. But because he understood. There was no room left for hesitation. Every decision from this point forward would determine whether he lived or disappeared inside enemy territory forever. As he moved toward the door, the woman spoke one final time. If something feels wrong, it is. Simple. Clear. Terrifying. At 7:27 in the evening, Daniel stepped back into the night. The village behind him. The forest ahead. And somewhere in that darkness, someone was waiting. The question was no longer just how far he had to go. The question was this. Was the next person he met going to guide him forward? Or deliver him straight into capture? 9:02 in the evening. Forest line west of the village, Germany. The darkness was complete. No moon. No clear horizon. Only shadows layered over shadows. At 9:02 in the evening, Daniel crossed into the forest. The moment he stepped under the trees, the world changed. Sound became sharper. Every branch crack. Every movement. Every breath echoed louder than it should. He slowed immediately. Because out here, speed meant noise. And noise meant death. At 9:04 in the evening, he stopped. Listened. Nothing. No voices. No movement. But something felt wrong. The woman's words repeated in his mind. If something feels wrong, it is. At 9:05 in the evening, he moved again. Careful. Measured. Following the direction Carl had given him. West. Toward the rail crossing. Toward the next contact. But something far worse was already unfolding. Because he was not alone. At 9:07 in the evening, a branch snapped behind him. Daniel froze. Every muscle locked. He did not turn immediately. He listened. Another sound. Soft. Deliberate. Not an animal. Too controlled. Someone was moving. Following. The realization hit instantly. He had been tracked. From the village. Through the checkpoint. Into the forest. At this moment, everything changed. This was no longer an escape. This was a hunt. What would you have done here? Run. Hide. Or face it. At 9:08 in the evening, Daniel moved off the path. Slowly. Quietly. Into thicker cover. If they were following his line, he needed to disappear. Break the pattern. Break the trail. At 9:09 in the evening, he crouched behind a fallen tree. Waited. Seconds stretched. Then, movement. A shadow passed between the trees. Then another. 2 figures. Close. Too close. German soldiers. Not random patrol. Focused. Tracking. At 9:10 in the evening, one of them spoke quietly. German. Short. Precise. They knew someone was here. But not exactly where. Not yet. Daniel controlled his breathing. In. Out. Slow. Silent. Because now, survival depended on patience. Not movement. But something far worse was about to happen. At 9:11 in the evening, a third figure appeared. From the opposite side. Cutting off the escape route. They were not just following. They were surrounding. Daniel's mind raced. Too fast. Too many variables. No clear exit. And then he remembered something. The rail crossing. It was close. Very close. If he could reach it, he might find the contact. Or at least create distance. But moving now meant exposure. And staying meant capture. At 9:12 in the evening, one of the soldiers stepped closer. Scanning. Rifle raised. Another step. Then another. They were tightening the circle. Daniel made his decision. He moved. Fast. Low. Silent for the first 2 steps. Then louder. Too loud. A branch snapped under his foot. The soldier reacted instantly. Shouting. Gun raised. At 9:13 in the evening, Daniel ran. No more hiding. No more stealth. Just speed. Behind him, voices erupted. Boots crashed through the undergrowth. Gunfire cracked through the trees. Close. Too close. A bullet tore through branches beside him. Another hit the ground ahead. At 9:14 in the evening, Daniel broke through the tree line. And saw it. The rail crossing. Dark. Empty. Silent. But not for long. Because headlights appeared in the distance. A vehicle. Approaching fast. From the wrong direction. From behind the crossing. Blocking the path forward. This was a trap. Planned. Coordinated. No escape route left. At this moment, everything collapsed. The network. The route. The plan. All of it. And then something impossible happened. At 9:15 in the evening, a whistle cut through the air. Sharp. Distinct. From the side. Daniel turned instinctively. A figure stepped out from the shadows near the tracks. Not a soldier. Civilian. Motioning urgently. This way! Another unknown. Another decision. But there was no time left. Behind him, the soldiers were closing in. Ahead, the vehicle was arriving. This was the final choice. Trust. Or capture. At 9:16 in the evening, Daniel ran toward the figure. No hesitation. No second thought. Because sometimes survival is not about certainty. It is about instinct. The man grabbed his arm. Pulled him toward a shallow ditch beside the tracks. Down! They dropped just as the vehicle's headlights swept across the crossing. Bright. Blinding. German voices filled the air. Orders shouted. Confusion. They had expected him to be on the tracks. Not beside them. Hidden. At 9:17 in the evening, the man leaned close. We wait. Daniel stared at him. Who are you? The man gave a short answer. Resistance. Another link in the chain. Another risk. But this one had just saved his life. For now. Minutes passed. The search moved away from the ditch. Toward the forest. In the wrong direction. At 9:20 in the evening, the man signaled. Now. They moved along the ditch. Low. Fast. Toward the far side of the crossing. And then into open ground beyond. Clear. For the moment. But the journey was far from over. Because Germany was only the beginning. Belgium. France. The Pyrenees. Spain. Hundreds of miles still ahead. Weeks of movement. Constant danger. And no guarantee of survival. But Daniel Hayes would make it. Step by step. Contact by contact. Through one of the most dangerous escape systems of the war. Guided by civilians who risked everything. Some of whom would be captured. Interrogated. Executed. Because helping men like him was punishable by death. And yet they still did it. Months later, Daniel would cross into Spain. Exhausted. Starving. But alive. One of the few who made it all the way through. And the impact of that survival was bigger than just one man. Because every airman who escaped denied the enemy a prisoner. Every successful evasion forced Germany to divert resources. And every story like this proved something critical. The war was not only fought on battlefields. It was fought in farms. In homes. In silence. In choices made under impossible pressure. So the next time you think about survival in war, ask yourself this. What would you have done? After the parachute opened, and the entire country below you was the enemy?